When most people think of fairies, they imagine the Hollywood version, adorable winged creatures living in woodlands among pretty flowers, waving tiny magic wands. But this is a far cry from the Irish version of a fairy. In Irish folklore, the Tuatha Dé Danann were one of the original inhabitants of Ireland, that is, till a warrior tribe, the Milesians or Celts, arrived. The Milesians attacked and won a war against the Tuatha Dé Danann, eventually driving them underground. The Tuatha Dé Danann used their innate magic to become the Shee, pronounced Shee, today known as the fairies, little people, or the wee folk. Like most folkloric events, the fairies in their magical, mysterious ways are often used to make sense of the indescribable or incomprehensible. Pre-Christian monuments are said to have been built by fairy folk. Bad luck and illness, as a result of offending the fairies, and people who disappear have been kidnapped by the little people. Even natural and supernatural phenomena can be explained by fairies. Generally, it's best to avoid angering the fairies, because who knows what they might do. Entrances to the otherworld of the fairies are everywhere: caves, tombs, barrows, forts, even tree hollows and roots. One example is a small cave in County Roscommon, Oweynagat Cave, which was long said to be the entrance to the otherworld. This was later Christianized, like much of Irish ancient history, to become known as the entrance to hell. Lone hawthorn trees, such as the tree pictured, are often called fairy trees. Some places inhabited by fairies are visible only to humans who have the gift. Other places are visible only once every 7 years. One example is Green Isle, a fairy island said to sit off the Causeway Coast, near Rathlin Island. In early Christian times, the people of Ireland associated anything vaguely pagan in origin as being related to the fairies, and in many people, the belief persists to this day. In fact, there are still some folk today who will claim to have seen fairies. Fairy forts are essentially the remains of Iron Age, early medieval ring forts, of which thousands remain in Ireland today. Farmers and landowners often plow and mow around them to avoid incurring the wrath of the little people. They also avoid disturbing Neolithic tombs, stone circles, and standing stones, all thought to be connected to the fairy world. In fact, in 1999, a new motorway was rerouted to save a fairy tree. Fear of fairy retribution has caused many major projects to topple, protecting these heritage sites and monuments associated with the wee folk. Folklore has played a more significant role in protecting these monuments and trees than the official government institutions. There are countless stories of humans seeing fairies, interacting with them, or even visiting the fairy world themselves. In many tales, the fairies live much the same way as the Irish. They farm, work, and party. According to Irish folklore and oral tradition, humans and fairies brushed shoulders on a frequent basis. The trick was to get along with them and not do anything that drew their attention. Specific methods were employed to keep the fairies at bay. Garlands of marigolds and primroses at your door, the wood of the ash. Rowan and blackthorn, or a bag of clover around your neck, were all means of self-protection from fairies. Another way was to turn your coat inside out when passing a fairy. They aren't fond of iron, salt, or bread either. There are accounts of humans being stolen away by the little people, either in mind or body or both. In versions of the tale, their loved ones attempt to rescue them. Usually, this is with the help of a wise woman with experience of the fairy world, following precise and sometimes bizarre instructions. If they are followed exactly, a loved one is returned, and if not, they live on in the fairy world. A fairy fort, if you were fortunate, you would be returned without any intervention. But the snag is that time works differently in the fairy world. One night can equate to a year. Fairies were said to employ humans to work for them for either 1 or 7 years. And if you spent 7 years with the fairies, you would return with a magical gift, the number 7 being an important symbol in Irish folklore. These humans, hired to work either as servants or farm laborers, often return with a warning not to talk about their experience, and not to point out or recognize the fairies. Failure to do this usually results in a punishment, such as losing one's voice or memory. In some ways, this story seems like an easy justification for why certain individuals disappeared at harvest. It's time when their labor was needed the most, and returned sometime later, full of tales they couldn't tell. Payment from this work was a funny thing too. Oftentimes compensation from the fairies did not work in the human world. It would disappear. Other times, it worked as a sort of magic coin that would always reappear after spending, but held its own curses. Like humans, fairies liked to have a good time and enjoyed parties, banquets, and drinking. Fairy forts are said to be where they carried out their celebrations and were treated with reverence and wariness. You could travel to their world if they invited you into the fairy fort. They could even transport you to other parts of the earth. However, you had to be careful given that time doesn't always work the same way there, so you could lose years of your life. Other worries arose too, if you rejected their invitation. You could be overrun by fairies and unable to get them out of your house and life. It is said the only way to rescue someone from a fairy fort was to pull them out with the branch of a mountain ash tree. In oral stories passed down through generations, fairies were known to be at odds with Christianity. They represented something pagan, bad, cursed, or unknown. The wise women were replaced, and the best way to get your life back to normal after a bad encounter was with the help of a priest. Whether fairies could go to heaven or not was apparently undecided, and something that weighed on rural folks' minds. This topic, too, made it into fairy folklore. Places once associated with the fairies or other pagan things like Neolithic tombs or monuments were later modified to have a Christian relevance. Entrances to the fairy world might now be entrances to hell or simply bad places. Brigid's history was adjusted so that she was now a Catholic saint. Throughout Ireland, place names and stories are peppered with sly fairies and good priests, almost always at odds with each other. These stories, like fairy tales in other cultures, serve as a warning, reminding the Irish of their Christian duties and what happens to those who turn their backs on them.